Oh, is Mrs. Stanbury back? I'm getting new glasses, and he went down to get them. Imperial Optical.
Okay. Mr. Smallwood, after more than 80 years of being a Newfoundlander, after being a Newfoundlander under responsible government, under commission of government, and under Confederation as a Canadian Newfoundlander, what would you say, or could you say, is it to be a Newfoundlander to you?
Well, you don't have to be born here. Some of the finest, almost you might say incomparably finest Newfoundlanders we've ever had were not born here, but came here from England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Channel Islands, Germany, France, Italy, Portugal, and many other places. You don't have to be born here. You have to live here to be a Newfoundlander. You're not a very sound one. You're not a very good Newfoundlander if you are not at least broadly familiar with the story of Newfoundland, with the history of Newfoundland. It doesn't really matter even if you were born here and you don't know anything about Newfoundland, you're hardly a Newfoundlander except technically. Oh, to be a Newfoundlander is to have been raised here, if not born, most of your life. Preferably to have got your education, such as it was, here. In other words, to imbibe, to absorb into through your very pores. If it isn't in your bloodstream, at least absorb it, the feeling, the atmosphere, the tenderness, the bitterness, the vindictiveness, the jealousy of islanders. It seems to me that I've been on a good many islands in my life, and it seems to me that there is a distinction, a difference. Prince Edward Islanders are different from Nova Scotians, the same country you might say, but they are different, and certainly Newfoundlanders are different. Oh, I suppose all kinds of people have tried to define Newfoundlander, what Newfoundlander means. And probably it's all vanity. Are we all altogether that different from Irishmen? They're islanders too. Englishmen, they're islanders too. In fact, England is not as big as Newfoundland. So they're even more islanders than we are in a sense. And possibly it's nonsense to just a sort of vanity, a sort of swell-headedness. I suppose all people everywhere on the earth think they're different, that they're distinctive, that they're distinguished even, and they hug that delusion, if it is delusion, they hug that to their very hearts. They want to be different, at least they want to be thought to be different. But I don't know that there's all that much difference between the people of any two spots of the earth. They certainly have more in common than they have to differentiate, to make them different from each other.
Canada, or the mainland of Canada, especially at the time of Confederation, had, or appear to have had a bit of trouble to know what to make of Newfoundland. And you get this great interest nowadays in Newfoundland culture and society as being something different or apart from the other Canadian identity. And you've had things in the past like Newfie jokes that have distinguished Newfoundland, or attempted to point out that Newfoundland is a different kind of a place. There's Newfie jokes, not Eastern Canadian jokes. What is it about the Canadians, do you think, again, having dealt with Canada, having traveled right across Canada, that makes them see something different about us? Is it simply a matter of geography?
Talking about my concept of Newfoundland and Newfoundlanders, it's just occurred to me, I ought to have said it in reply to your question, there's another feeling that has existed in some Newfoundlanders, perhaps many, and that is, and I put it one time in a speech or somewhere, I said that many Newfoundlanders felt toward Newfoundland much as a mother does toward a crippled child. Newfoundland has been bludgeoned so much and had so much hard luck, has been so harshly treated in so many ways over so long a period of time, that you could have a sort of a feeling of pity, the kind of compassion that you can imagine a mother having for a crippled child. Because Newfoundland was crippled. I wouldn't say that she is crippled now, but she was crippled over a long, long period of time in so many, many ways. And Newfoundlanders suffered. Now, you know, the question might be asked, all right, you know Newfoundland very well, you know Newfoundland's history, but do you know the history of other places as well? And really, when you compare the need for compassion toward Newfoundlanders with that toward other people, is there any really more reason for Newfoundlanders to be pitied or to be commiserated with than other peoples? Haven't all peoples been treated harshly and unjustly? In the prime of our time, from that point of view, when we were most harshly treated, when we were most unjustly treated, were we all that much more harshly treated and unjustly than were other peoples? If you knew the story of Ireland, of Sardinia, of any of the Bahamas, of any of the Caribbean or West Indian islands, or any part of the world, if you're as familiar with their story as you are with your Newfoundland story, would you be all that sure that Newfoundlanders have been particularly or distinctively or peculiarly harshly treated? Have they been any more harshly treated than almost anyone else at relatively the same time? With this possible exception that Newfoundlanders it might have been later in AD, later when Newfoundlanders ceased to be as harshly treated as others ceased to be harshly treated in other parts of the world. In other words, they caught up a little more rapidly than we did. That might be the only difference.
I wondered if it...
We just paused there a second.
oh, okay.
We stopped there for a second.
You've been a Newfoundlander, lived in Newfoundland, as I said earlier, under these various conditions. I suppose the greatest change came in 1949 at Confederation. Has what it means to be a Newfoundlander, what it means to live in Newfoundland, perhaps more tangibly, changed very much in your lifetime, in the effect that it's had on the mind of a Newfoundlander, in addition to or apart from the material changes that have occurred?
Well, for the first 23 years of our life as a province of Canada, I had really quite extraordinarily remarkable opportunities compared with most other Newfoundlanders, opportunities to see the change in people. For example, I went in every one of the 23 years, I went to 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 schools each year. And I saw the students in each of the 23 years. I could see the difference with my eyes. It was unmistakable in the way they dressed. They dressed more, shall I say, gaudily, less drably. They were healthier looking, year in, year after year. And now, not only those 23 years, but almost every year of the last 11. That's 33 or 34 years. I've been going to schools. In the last week, I've been to 6, 7 schools. And so I've had a marvelous opportunity to see Newfoundlanders in large numbers every year for 30 odd years, beginning with the arrival of Confederation. Now, I was thoroughly familiar with Newfoundland before that. After all, in 1949, when we became a province, I was 49 years old. And I had traveled to 1,000 of the 1,300 places there were in the country known as Newfoundland, which included Labrador, 1,000 of them. And I had met tens, quite literally, tens of thousands of Newfoundlanders, and I had been in, I suppose, 3,000-4,000 homes in Newfoundland. Some of that would be while campaigning for election, knocking on a door, being admitted, chatting with the voters and going on again. But some of it was during the years when I was organizing a fishermen's union up and down the northeast coast, all the way from Pooch Cove and Balleen and Flat Rock and Torbay here on the St. John's shore, northward to the Wadham Islands on the northeast coast. And I had met many thousands of fishermen and been in hundreds of meetings with them, and in the boats with them, and in many homes, in lodge meetings. And I had been a reporter, newspaper editor, and a radio broadcaster as barrelman with my own program, 6 nights a week, 11 months a year. I took a month off every year to go traveling around Newfoundland. So at the age of 49, I had known very literally tens and tens of thousands of Newfoundland people over a period of, say, well, the first time I ever left Newfoundland, left St. John's to go to an outport was about 1908 or 9 or 10. No, it would be 1908. It was out to in Conception Bay to Topsail and Manuels and Kelligrews, Foxtrap. And then, beginning then, from then on, for 70 years, I was visiting Newfoundland. So I had an excellent opportunity, a much bigger, a much greater opportunity than, I wouldn't say than any other Newfoundlander, but nearly I could almost say that. There have never been many Newfoundlanders that traveled as much in Newfoundland as no one that traveled as much in the period during which I did the traveling. Before that there might have been, but not in my time, not after, say, 1910. Did anyone travel as much in Newfoundland or meet as many people or go in so many homes, so many schools, so many halls, so many industrial enterprises, fishery plants, commercial enterprises, forest operations, fishing operations, mining operations? No one, I suppose. That's not a matter of boasting. It just so happened that in the nature of my work as a radio broadcaster, as a newspaper reporter, as a newspaper editor, as an organizer of trade unions, as an organizer of co-op societies, and as a politician, and as a premier, I think I can say, I hope that it won't be taken as boasting. I was just lucky. I was terribly lucky to have that opportunity, because it did do this. It did make me a very unusually competent, I was going to say judge, that's not the word, understander is a clumsy word, but it did give me a remarkably good understanding of Newfoundland, geographically, topographically, of Newfoundland people, of their appearance, the way they ate, the way they dressed, the way they walked, the way they talked, the way they argued, the way they thought, it gave me that kind of understanding, very, very unusual one. There have been lots of school inspectors, school superintendents, and teachers traveling around the island, but I don't think there ever was, from 1949 to 1972, even any school inspector who was in as many schools, because normally the school inspectors go to the schools only of their own denominations for whom they are appointed, and I go to schools of all denominations. Yeah, I think it's a fair statement, if not too terribly boastful, but it's factual. I think I do understand the Newfoundland people about as well as most people, if not all. That's a long answer to a very innocent question, but a very important question. Very important.
And you've had, because you started that that wandering, the investigation of Newfoundland people, or at least going to see them in all of these different communities. Probably a longer look at over more diverse circumstances than anyone else as well. How have the children, say in the schools, changed in their thinking about Newfoundland, about things, about what they can do? How's it changed since, say, your wandering or your travels around Newfoundland organizing in the 20s? How do they compare with your travels now to different schools speaking to them?
Well, the children, I would say that the average youngster in Newfoundland today of 11, 12 years old is as knowledgeable, as well informed, and intellectually as mature as the youngsters of Newfoundland 20, 25, 30 years ago, who were 16, 17 years old. I've discussed that with teachers. I was down in Green Bay the other day to a big Pentecostal school. And they, knowing I was coming, had invited their parents. And so it turned out to be, almost that whole settlement, men, women, and children, young and old. And I asked, I was there a large part of the day, and we had a meal. We stopped the speechifying. We all sat in and had a meal, and then resumed the speechifying. And I had a good chance to talk, and I asked them that question. What you lived? You were born here? Yes. You lived here all your life? Yes. Went to school here? Yes. Earned your living here? Yeah. How old are you, sir? I'm 73 or 71 or whatever, or some woman around that age, 50, 60, 70, 80 years of age. Well, you know this place pretty well. Yeah. Do you see much difference in it now and say 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Let's see. How long have we been a province of Canada? We've been a province 1949. That's 72 years, isn't it? That's 33 years, isn't it? Do you see much difference since Confederation? Of course, I would have a peculiarly selfish reason. I would have a sort of conflict of interest there, because I would hope that the answer would be always and ever and everywhere in Newfoundland, the answer would be, oh yes, a great difference, a big difference, a wonderful difference, a marvelous difference, but is it for the better? Oh yes, for the better, and so on, so on, so on, so. As a matter of fact, I have in many, many speeches described the coming of the Confederation as the greatest gift. Well, I usually begin by saying, in all the world, since the world began, what is God's greatest gift to all his creatures? Not only his human creatures, men, women, children, but animals, fish, birds. All his creatures. What's his greatest gift to all his creatures everywhere? And I like, could somebody tell me that? And always, nearly always, the answer will come life. Yes, quite. Life. The gift of life is God's greatest gift. And that's his greatest gift to us as creatures of God. All his creatures, everywhere. We're no different. We're God's creatures here on this island or in Labrador. But now, what was God's greatest gift? Not to us as his creatures, like all his creatures, but what's God's greatest gift to us as Newfoundlanders? Some gift to us that he didn't give to anyone else. What special gift has God given to Newfoundlanders? And then I always give the answer. Sometimes someone will shout out the answer from the audience. But mostly I don't wait for that. I give the answer. Of course, it's Confederation. With Canada, God's greatest gift to Newfoundlanders as Newfoundlanders. In fact, I said, if it isn't sacrilegious to do it, I would say this. I would say that God had looked on all his creatures, all around his creation, and that included Newfoundland. But at last, after the best part of 500 years, God suddenly stopped, and he concentrated his sight on Newfoundland. And the first time for maybe 1,000 or a couple of thousand years, maybe the last time he looked down and gave Newfoundland a good hard look, there was nobody here, maybe a few Beothics, a few Eskimos in Labrador, a few Indians, but altogether maybe 1,000, a couple of thousand altogether in that vast territory of Labrador and the huge island of Newfoundland, and 1,000 or 2,000 years pass, and now suddenly he stops and he concentrates his sight on Newfoundland and he looks at the people. He sees the way they work. What hard workers, he says to himself. What hard workers those people are, and look at the hard conditions they're living under. Look at the food they have or haven't got. Look at the homes. Look, they've got no roads, they've got no streets, they've got no paving. They've just got a handful of hospitals, and they're not very up to date, and their schools are a horror, little one-room schools, and so on. And he looks at Newfoundland and he says, I've been neglecting those nice people down there. I think it's time to give them a special gift, something special. I will make up for my neglect of the last 1,000 or a couple of thousand years since the last time I had a good hard look at them. I'm going to give them Confederation with Canada. Well, I said, I don't know if God ever did that. And I don't know whether he knew what he was doing when he gave us Confederation, but I do know that it was the greatest gift that God has given the Newfoundland people, and I don't know that there ever could be a greater gift. I've said that repeatedly all over Newfoundland. In fact, I've said that all across Canada, especially where in the last 3 or 4 years I've been talking in universities and colleges and schools and clubs of all kinds from coast to coast on Canadian unity, trying to do my little bit to drive home the lesson to all Canadians that they should be on their knees thanking God for having such a great land as Canada. And then I would tell them that the most grateful Canadians in Canada are the million Newfoundlanders. Now that always surprises them. They didn't think there were a million of us. And I always have to add immediately that that is the 600,000 Newfoundlanders that are in Newfoundland and the 400,000 other Newfoundlanders that are living in the other 9 provinces and the 2 territories. The million of us, we million Newfoundlanders, are the most thankful and grateful of all Canadians. So I put in a plug for Newfoundland. And frankly, to be very frank, I'm going to say this because you're not going to be using it for rank partisan purposes, nor is the university now or ever. And if ever, it'll be at a time when it won't matter anyway. Let me say this, that I've taken great joy in talking along that line as I traveled across Canada, because as a sort of antidote, or in the hope that it would be partly an antidote to the terrible, the absolutely terrible things that have been said in Newfoundland about Canada in these last few years, this terrible practice of confrontation, of denouncing Newfoundland. I every year, without exception, for the 23 years that I was Premier, every year, imagine now, 23 years without a solitary exception, I never, but never, but never let a month pass. 12 times 24, it's a lot of months. And I never let a month pass without seizing, gladly and joyfully, the opportunity to praise Canada, to say how glad we were now to be Canadians, to say what a wonderful thing Confederation was turning out to be. I built, something around between 5,000 and 6,000 miles of new roads in those 23 years. And if you were to take those roads and stretch them out end to end, they'd reach from St. John's across this island, right across Canada to the Pacific coast. And that wouldn't use up all those new roads that I built. You'd have to come across Canada again. You get back almost to Winnipeg to use up all those new roads. And I opened nearly all of them. I took great fun, perhaps for cheap, tawdry, selfish, partisan reasons, hoping it would help to persuade people to vote for me. Well, even if it were, that's not so horrible in a politician. If a politician does something that is worthy of people's support, I suppose it's not too disreputable if that politician just gently hints at it and tells the people. And I could do that by opening the roads, and I opened hundreds of roads in Newfoundland with ceremonies where the whole population of the place would turn out, a place that got a road that had never had a road in all the hundreds of years they'd been there, in all the years of their almost utter isolation, places where you could get in or out by boat and latterly by a helicopter, or going over the rocks and boulders and stumps and bogs and through the trees. You could get into them that way. They were genuinely isolated. They were indeed cut off. And now a road right in. And a big ceremony to open the road, a ribbon stretched across the road, and the whole population there, the entire population, might be somebody dying, and some people dying might insist on being up to see the big new road opened. And the road mightn't be big, but it was certainly new. And then they'd have a scissors for me. I've got a raft of scissors now. I don't know what to do with them. But they're all engraved, they're all carved, giving the place the time and the date and presented to me. This would be the scissors, you see, big scissors. And then the ribbon would be stretched across the road. And my job was to cut that ribbon, you see, to open the road. And the crowd would be there, and of course I would have to make a speech. And I would tell them that, it was a proud moment for all of us Newfoundlanders to see this road. Thanks to Canada. We wouldn't have it but for Canada, but for what the money we get from Ottawa, and so on and so on and so on. If we hadn't become Canadians, we wouldn't be getting this road. And having made that remark, I would then say, now, I am here today to open the road, and I'm going to do that by cutting the ribbon. There's the ribbon, there's the scissors. And I suppose you people think there's nothing to it, huh? You just take it, and maybe you men, you fishermen, hard-working men, but I'm so little. I'm so little. I said, I don't have the strength to work those big, heavy scissors. I need help. Can I get some help? Will all the youngsters here, every youngster here under 15 or under, will you please come up to help me? And the entire juvenile population would come up. And I would say, now, you're willing to help me? Yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah. You're sure? Yeah, you want to help me? Yeah, you want to? Sure. All right, I'll tell you what you want to do. You touch the ribbon, just touch it. Don't breeze down on it. Breeze. Don't breeze down on it. Just touch it. Touch it gently. That's all. I don't want you to break this ribbon. We're going to cut it with the scissors. Don't break it. So don't breeze down on it. And you line right up from one end across the road, you see. Now, and they're all up there, they line up, and they'd line up and say, well, you can't all get your hand in to touch the ribbon. If you can't get your hand in to touch the ribbon, touch the shoulder of the person who is touching the ribbon, and the magic will go through. And then you'd have 2 lines of youngsters. And then I get a third. If you can't touch the ribbon, and you can't touch a fellow who's touching the ribbon, then touch somebody's shoulder that's touching someone that's touching the ribbon. By now, the adults, of course, the grown-ups, would get great fun out of it. And then when I had them all ready, now, you're ready to go. We're going to open this road. I think before we open it, I think you should give it a cheer. You're happy to have the road. How about cheering for this road? But before you cheer for the road, how about cheering for the settlement? You know, Tickle Cove or whatever was the name of the settlement, you see. How about it? Are you any good at cheering? I said, what you'll do, you follow me. I'll say, hip, 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 and you say, hooray. And then I'll say again, hip, 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 and you say, hooray. And then the third time, hip, 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 hooray. Now, you ready? You remember now? Hip, hip, hip. All right, now let's go. And then I do it, and I say, no. No, I say, I'm disappointed. I thought you youngsters would be able to put up a real cheer. Remember what you're cheering for. You're cheering for your harbour. You're cheering for your parents. You're cheering for your schools. You're cheering for everything. And surely you can cheer better than that. And then I'd look at one of the grown-ups, and I'd know the name of the next place 3 miles away. You see, I'd say, what's the name of the next place? And they'd tell me, how far is that? Only 3 miles. I said, okay, now I want to cheer for them that they'll hear down there. Now come on, let's have a real cheer. And there would be a real cheer. And then I'd cut the ribbon. I did that hundreds of times. And there must be, in Newfoundland, this day, this year, 1983, there must be a few thousand people grown up now who helped to open those roads. Well, every hospital I opened, every school I opened, I built 1,000 schools, you know, 1,000 new schools. And I opened most of them. I think I was going to miss that chance. And everything that happened along that line, I drove it home. What a wonderful thing it was we had joined Canada. What a marvelous thing it was. That the people, a majority of them, a little majority, a very little majority, only 52 Newfoundlanders, 52 out of every 100 that voted, 52 said they went in and they were given a ballot paper, they went in behind the curtain, and there was a pencil in there waiting for them. They took up the pencil, they had to mark an X. What did they mark, those 52 Newfoundlanders out of every 100 that voted? Yes, I want to be a Canadian. Yes, I want Newfoundland to join Canada. Yes, I want Newfoundland to be a province of Canada. Yes, I want Confederation. And down went the X. 52 Newfoundlanders out of every 100 that voted did that, but of course 48 out of every 100 said, no, I don't want to be a Canadian. I don't want Newfoundland to join Canada. I don't want Newfoundland to be a province of Canada. That's how it was that day. But today, now, a year later, 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, whatever year I was there for 23 years, whatever year it would be. Now, 18 years later, I think there's 6 or 7 people in Newfoundland that are against Confederation. I heard there were 8 or 9, but I don't believe that. But remember this. You've got to be fair about it. Newfoundland has every right to have her proper, due and proper and just and fair share of jackasses. We have as much right as any province to have a share of jackasses, and we have our share. We haven't been deprived. No one has cheated us out of our proper share of jackasses. And the jackasses are those who, after 10 years of Confederation, or 12 or 15 or 18 or whatever it was, can't see that Confederation was a gift of God, can't see that it's the best thing that ever happened to us. They're jackasses, aren't they? And of course, I seized every opportunity. And those that were there I seized, and those that weren't there I made. I did things so that I could say things like that, to keep reminding Newfoundlanders of what a great country we belong to now. That because you were a loyal Canadian didn't mean that you were a disloyal Newfoundlander. It didn't mean you had to turn your back on Newfoundland. It didn't mean that you had to turn your back on your history, your tradition, your heritage. It didn't even mean that you had to turn your back on the place where your forefathers came from. If your forefathers came to Newfoundland from England, you don't have to turn your back on England, or on Ireland, or Scotland, or Wales, or the Channel Islands, or wherever they came from. That's part of your heritage. You can be proud of that. You can be proud of Newfoundland. And that doesn't make you any less a patriotic Canadian. Now, I've said that in every speech from coast to coast in Canada. I've said that any of you here who came to Canada from Germany, or Japan, or China, or Hong Kong, or the Caribbean, or the West Indies, or Central America, or South America, or any part of Africa, or the United States, or wherever you came from, you don't have to turn your back on your origins, where your ancestors lived for maybe many hundreds, maybe thousands of years. You can be a loyal Canadian and still have respect and affection for your forefathers and the land of your forefathers. And so here in Newfoundland, to be a loyal Canadian does not mean, how stupid would anyone be who said that, who would claim that you can't be a good, loyal, patriotic Canadian and at the same time a good, loyal, patriotic Newfoundlander. That's silly and that's stupid. That for 23 years in Newfoundland, while I was Premier. Now, I got laid off 11 years ago, just about now, another few days. It'll be 11 years. I got laid off. I lost my job. I had the best job that any man ever had in Newfoundland. No one ever had a better job than the job of being a Premier, Prime Minister of Newfoundland, and I had it for 23 years, and almost the minute I was laid off, almost from the minute that I ceased to be Premier to this minute now, 11 years later, the Newfoundland people have scarcely heard one word, one syllable of praise, of loyalty, of thankfulness, of gratitude to Canada. And you have now scores and scores of thousands of students that are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, who have never yet heard a word of praise, but have hardly ever ceased to hear words of condemnation of Canada, running Canada down, slander of Canada. Canada, the great nation of Canada, with all her generosity to Newfoundland, treated as though she were the enemy. The enemy. Canada is the enemy. The Parliament of Canada, the Government of Canada, the provinces of Canada are Newfoundland's enemy. That's all the younger element of our population have heard. The older ones have heard, they heard me for 23 years, some of them, and they know the difference. But youngsters today, I would say, what have you got? You've got over 150,000 students in the schools. I would say that easily 100,000 of them are under 20. So they would only be 9 years old when I went out. And for the last 11 years, they haven't heard anything but condemnation and slander. Canada is robbing us. Canada is cheating us. Canada is treating us as third or fourth class people. Canada is robbing us. Canada won't give us our rights. They even continued, this is incredible. It's true, but it's all but unbelievable, and I cannot bring myself to believe that very many Newfoundland people believe it, accept it, and agree with it. Because even since our own Supreme Court, made up of our own Newfoundlanders, patriotic Newfoundlanders, born and raised here, educated here, made their living here, married here, had their families here, just as much a Newfoundlander as I am or you or any other Newfoundlander. That court, 3 judges. And by the way, before I go on, let me remind you that our Premier came out several times in public and announced to the Newfoundland people that he was determined to put that case in the Newfoundland Supreme Court before it ever went to the Supreme Court of the whole nation in Ottawa. He was determined to go first to our court because the 3 judges in our court were Newfoundlanders. They live in Newfoundland. They understand Newfoundland. And he didn't add, but he meant, he couldn't have meant anything else. What he said didn't have any meaning if it didn't have this meaning. Because they're Newfoundlanders, they are patriots. They will give a patriotic judgment. They won't go by the facts. They won't go by evidence. They won't listen to anything. Their minds are made up now. They're going to give the verdict in favor of Newfoundland, that Newfoundland owns the offshore. Now, I marveled when he said that. I thought it was the most offensive thing that I had heard in a long while said about any public men. You're sort of used to hearing it said about politicians, but you're not used to hearing it said about the very dispensers of justice, the judges. And I wondered why they didn't come out with an indignant statement and repudiate what the Premier had hinted, that they would give their verdict. After hearing the case, they would give their verdict not as judges, but as patriots. And if they had made a statement like that, they would have to add, and if we had done such a thing as that, we would deserve to be booted off the bench. You don't go to the Supreme Court of the land to get patriotism. You go to get justice. You go to get a just and an honorable and an honest and truthful verdict, a judgment based on the facts. And even after our 3 Newfoundland judges gave their judgment based on the facts that Newfoundland did not own the offshore now, she did not own it yesterday, she did not own it the day before, she didn't own it last year or the year before or 10 years before or 100 years before, that Newfoundland never did for 1 single minute, never did own the offshore. Even after that judgment, you still hear Mr. Peckford and some of his ministers, 1 or 2 in particular, talking about our offshore, almost pretending that there was no judgment from the Supreme Court. So you have today at least 100,000 students in Newfoundland. These are the Newfoundlanders who are going to be making and unmaking governments. These are the Newfoundlanders who 5, 8, 10 years from now are going to be running this province. They're going to be running the industries, they're going to be running the professions, they're going to be operating the schools and the colleges. These are 100,000 of them. Never a word, none so poor as to do reverence to Canada. But the more you can sling dirt, the more you can condemn, the more you can slander Canada, the more you can describe her as a dirty, mean scoundrel that's trying to cheat this poor old Newfoundland, the more you'll be listened to.
Why do you think this has happened? You hear from President administration things like not going to Ottawa with cap in hand, as has been done in the past. Why are statements like that made, and why this whole confrontational thing, do you think? Is it simply a matter of Ottawa having one political party?
I was there for 23 years, and I went hat in hand to Ottawa but not 1/4. Even in 23 years, I didn't go 1/4 as many times altogether in the 23 years as my successors had gone altogether in 11 years. You can't turn on the radio, but some minister is going to Ottawa, he's sending to Ottawa, he's telephoning to Ottawa. He wants 50% of the cost of doing this, 50% of the cost of doing that, and mostly he's not satisfied with 50%, he wants Ottawa to pay 90% of it. The number of times that they go, now is that hat in hand? It's true that they don't go with a hat. Well, nowadays a lot of people don't wear hats or caps, and if they do, they don't. They go hold it and get down on their knees and grovel and please, Mr. Ottawa, please, our rich uncle, please, Uncle Ottawa, please, will you do this for us, do that for us, do the other. They don't do exactly that. But what is it? When they never let a day pass without phoning or writing or sending a telegram or a telex. And is that wrong? No, that's not wrong. I did it, but I did it, I hope, not, trying to turn the whole population of Newfoundland against Ottawa. I did it quietly, politely, courteously, and almost privately. And I didn't announce, I'm demanding this, I'm demanding that, I'm demanding the other. Why doesn't Ottawa do this? Why doesn't Ottawa do that? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do that 20 years ago? No credit for them about anything. For the last 11 years now, what I hope is that gradually that Newfoundlanders will say to themselves, I went out with blood in my eyes. I went out almost fit to commit murder. I went out spoiling for a fight to mark my X for our defender, our saviour, the man who was willing to shed his very blood for Newfoundland, to defend Newfoundland and win her rights and keep those scoundrels in Ottawa from cheating us, taking our rights away from us, the rights, by the way, that we never had. They went out there a couple of years ago, couldn't wait. They stumbled as they hurried to the polling station. They went in out of breath. They went in holding their breath. They were breathless with excitement. They were voting to save Newfoundland from those scoundrels by voting for the man who was willing to shed his very blood. I hope, and I rather suspect, and I can say this very frankly before I die, knowing that you're not going to use it in the next election or the one after, that this probably will not be seen, at least this part of this long talk will not be seen, while it could cause any objection whatsoever from anyone in Newfoundland. I can say it now very frankly that I hope, and I suspect, that my hope will be fulfilled, that tens and hundreds of thousands of Newfoundlanders will say, I was conned. I'm afraid I was bluffed. I'm afraid I fell for it. He's a slick little fellow. He's quite a talker. And I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. I took it right on down. And I thought what he said was right. And I dare say he really thought it himself. I dare say, if the truth were known, Mr. Peckford really did believe that he owned, that Newfoundland owned the offshore, and that dirty, mean scoundrel Ottawa were trying to cheat us out of it. And yet I wonder, did he believe? Look, when British Columbia and Ottawa had a big case in the Supreme Court of Canada, who owned the offshore on the Pacific Ocean, I sent a lawyer to sit in on that case. He didn't take any part in it. I sent him as an observer to listen and watch and hear everything that was said and come back and report it to us. Because, did we have, if BC had it, that would be good for us. If BC didn't have the offshore rights, maybe we did because we came in later. Maybe there's some special reason that applied to us that didn't apply to BC. Anyhow, we sent a lawyer there as an observer, and he came back and he reported to us. But I went a step further. I said, you know, what's needed is a special study to be made of what case we have. Maybe we have a case. We want to know what that case is. And you know what I did? I engaged the greatest constitutional lawyer in the whole of Canada. I got him. He was the dean of the law school of the University of Alberta. And I picked Alberta deliberately. I could have got deans of law schools in other provinces, but I picked Alberta because Alberta was an oil province, you see. And I engaged him to make a special study of Newfoundland's case. Has Newfoundland got a case? And if she has, what is her case? That says that Newfoundland owns the offshore on the Atlantic Ocean. This was after the verdict was rendered by the Supreme Court of Canada that not BC, but all Canada owned the offshore on the Pacific. I engaged him. What do you think his report was? His report is up in the Justice Department right now. I ascertained 1 week ago that the report is there. It's there for Mr. Peckford to read, for Mr. Cabot Martin to read, for Mr. Marshall to read. The report is there. They said we didn't have a case. That's been confirmed by our own Supreme Court. We haven't got a case. We never did own it. But we must give him the benefit of the doubt. We must assume that he didn't read that. Or if he did, he didn't believe it. Or that if he read it, he thought he knew better than the dean of the law school in the University of Alberta, one of Canada's great authorities on constitution and constitutional law. Or, well, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't have enough background and enough knowledge and enough experience to be able to make a good judgment. And he has two men advising him that are very strong-minded, wrong, but strong, but wrong. The Supreme Court says you're wrong. You've always been wrong on this matter. So they were strong, but they were wrong. It's hard to say which was the greater. Were they stronger or were they wronger? But they were both. But anyway, whatever, the fact remains that people ought to be coming to the conclusion, well, he was wrong on that. He was wrong on this. He was wrong on the other. And maybe we shouldn't join with him in hating our country. We shouldn't join with him. We should repudiate him. He repudiates Canada. Now let us repudiate him. Now I may say that the Liberal Party would like to have that quote in the next election. But I have the undertaking from you that it's not going to be used
It will not constitute any part of a political
event.
We've just come to the end of our tape at the